Have you ever felt invisible, like the world stopped seeing you even before you could speak? My guest today, Janae Weinhold, knows that feeling all too well. At just 11 months old, after the birth of her baby sister, who suffered from colic, Janae shut down inside herself. Decades later, an illness rooted in that early wound helped her recognize what was happening, and she completely transformed her life and the direction of her work. Today, we'll explore how the experiences we can't even remember consciously can shape our health, our choices, and our entire path, and how healing them can awaken us to who we truly are.
Welcome to Awakening Soul Divinity, your sacred space for deep healing and transformation. Listen to inspiring conversations with healing experts, spiritual guides, and teachers as we explore ancient wisdom, modern healing, and powerful stories of change. I'll also share practical insights from my personal journey, from spiritual crisis to inner purpose. Whether you're seeking to overcome anxiety, embrace your true nature, or awaken your higher self, this podcast offers guidance to help you transform your life and elevate collective consciousness.
Now, before we dive in, if you're here because you're seeking truth, healing, and transformation, make sure to subscribe and share this episode with someone who's ready for their own awakening. Every conversation here is meant to inspire your journey and remind you you're not alone. Welcome, Janae. I'm really excited you decided to join me on this journey.
We've tried, and here we finally are.
That's right. That's right. It's been a little bit, but that's okay. We're meant to show up when we show up.
Exactly.
So, I'm going to just jump into the first question. Can you just go a little deeper into the trauma you experienced so our audience can hear just how profound it is and how your personal healing journey got you where you're today and into the work that you do? You remember all that, or should I repeat?
We can do it in pieces.
In pieces. We'll start with the trauma and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay.
Right. Well, it was very interesting that my parents, who were married back in the 1930s, were obviously aware of birth control because they didn't have their first child until almost 4 years. And then they didn't have me after that for another 3.5 years. So
Wow.
I'm sure my parents were totally shocked and surprised when my mother discovered that she was pregnant. And probably I was like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months old, because she didn't have a cycle before she got pregnant. So
Wow.
here comes my sister, and I'm just over 11 months old. And I was a wanted, planned child, and here comes his sister, who was obviously unplanned, and she always felt unwanted. I think my parents had shame about having sex so soon after the birth of a child. It's kind of like, telling the truth about things we don't talk about. But she
Right.
was obvious
Right.
evidence. So when I had this bout of pneumonia earlier this year, it catapulted me back into this. It was actually a full-blown download with all the pictures and the feelings and a sense of being inside this memory of her coming home from the hospital and crying. And she cried and she cried and she cried. And the whole focus in the household was about, let's keep this, what's wrong with this baby that she keeps crying? So here I was on my, wanted, desired path. And all of a sudden, this person interrupts the trajectory of my life. And what I discovered as I was going through the kind of memory and the healing of all of that was that this was a point where I decided, the other people's needs were more important than mine, especially her needs. And that was like this point where I just took the focus off of my needs because I guess if I could take care of my mother and make sure my mother was calm, that she might have some energy or attention left over
Mm,
for me. So this fits very well with my life work because I have been a developmental psychologist and therapist. I think my whole life. I think this is actually when it started.
yeah.
So I'm very familiar with the, process of going in and, recovering these memories and actually like redeciding things that were decided very early before really understanding exactly what this decision was all about. So
Mhm.
it was very interesting at that time. My sister was living with me. I had gotten her from a memory care home and was very involved in her rehabilitation and taking care of her. And all of a sudden, I saw myself in this same pattern. It's like,
Mm,
I'm doing all these things, I got acupuncture for her and herbal remedies and I took her for massage and all kinds of body work. And I was heavily invested, in her caretaking. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm in the same pattern. It's like, why am I doing this? Well, is it a conscious choice? And are we playing out some patterns? So it took a lot of really, I would say, soul searching,
mhm.
Partly I really went through the memories of feeling invisible and just kind of like this silent little wide-eyed child, that was over in the corner because she wasn't making any noise and she wasn't crying and she wasn't demanding anything. She was being like the good girl.
Mhm, mhm,
So that pattern kind of continued on, and I really became my mother's caretaker and was doing all kinds of things to help my mom stabilize so that she would have some time and energy left over for me. Well, that turned me into being mother's little helper, and I got all this praise and recognition for being such a grown-up little girl and not having any needs and knew what mama needed and could run here and run there and be her helper person. So I just saw so many of my patterns that had gotten anchored in this really early experience.
mhm,
So at some level, I wasn't surprised that it showed up. Not only the fact that, I was being a caregiver for my sister, but also it emerged out of this framework that I have been developing for a long time, maybe over 25 years. And the spiritual framework recognizes that the more people do their spiritual work, the more that kind of like the upper chakras open. And the more aware we become, the more it dredges up all of these really early memories. And frankly, from a developmental perspective, I'm pretty sure the first year anchors all of
mhm,
our karma. So all these things that we say are trauma are really karma trauma, and that they were put in place. They are put in place, and they don't really emerge until we get kind of, far enough along in our evolution to, number one, recognize them, and number two, have the resources to do
mhm.
something about them. So that's kind of where I have been in processing all this trauma.
Wow. Okay. And it leads me to another question because I met you through a mutual acquaintance of ours, and I ended up getting your book, Love, how do you pronounce it? Lovevolution or Love
Evolution, my evolution.
Lovevolution. Okay. And in that book actually completely shifted my life because as I've talked to you about this before, you explain developmental trauma in there. And I know you're updating things and you're doing things in relation to that book, to this new understanding that you have. But can you give kind of like a baseline understanding of what developmental trauma is? Because what happened to you as a child is how you explained it in the book as developmental trauma. And so just for our listeners or audience to hear about what that is, just so they have an understanding of what like a starting point and then moving into the direction that you've gone into. So we could start there.
Well, when I began working in the field of traumatology, and there was a lot of information out there that I recognized was event trauma. So event trauma is something that we have a memory of. I mean, we were in a car crash, or we're in an accident, or we fell. It's something that we can recall. And then I realized I was working with a lot of clients, including myself, who had all these memories that they didn't remember. And I'm like, well, what is this? So I began calling it developmental trauma because it happens so early in our life that it actually shapes our development. So
Yeah.
developmental trauma is trauma that is early, and that exactly like I described, because I learned to put other people's needs before my own. And this developmental trauma really is invisible to most people until they get into intimate relationships.
The mirrors, huh?
Well, what's interesting, Caroline, is that in intimate relationships, we step by step kind of take down our defenses, because what we always want to do is get really, really close with people. I mean, the ideal dream is that two people become one. I mean, I think it's behind kind of the unhealthy thing we call codependency. But I think there's also
Yeah,
I think
I know
there's
all
also
about that.
I think there's also a spiritual desire that we have to really experience this, what I would call fusion of souls.
Mm,
So and this part I think is very, very unconscious. So as we kind of dissemble all of our defenses and we move into deeper and deeper intimacy, what I discovered we encounter is actually the relational template that we have with our mother, because our mother is the teacher
mhm.
of relationship. She's our first relationship. So everything that happens in the mother-child relationship creates some dynamic that we carry into all of our other relationships, not just our love relationships, with adult people, but also we carry it into our relationships with our children.
Yeah.
And for sure, we play it out with our siblings. So this is some kind of, I call it a template. And wherever we go, we just join our template with this other person's template. And usually we choose people whose templates have some correspondence to our own. Maybe they remind us of a mother or a father or a sibling.
Mhm.
Um, but this is what we use when we engage in really close intimacy. So that's the good news. The bad news is that everything that's not finished in these early relationships, including all of the things that are trauma, they come up when we get close. And people are like, well, I thought she was the one, or I thought he was the one. And then all this stuff came up. It's like, I would have clients who would say, they would talk about how idyllic their relationship was in the beginning. And as soon, then they would say, and I don't know what happened. And I would say, congratulations. And they would do, what? What do you mean? Congratulations. And it's like, you've picked a person who is exactly what you need to help all of your developmental trauma. And they're like,
Soul growth. Yay. Okay.
and then I say, you didn't read the fine print, because
Yeah.
that's kind of, I would say, the karmic agreement that we have, that
Hmm.
our souls are always looking for the deepest healing that we can find. And so we gravitate to people who have all of them. Well, first of all, we always find people that we like. And in the beginning, they have like the best traits of our mom and the best traits of our dad. And that's what makes us think, oh,
This
this is.
is wonderful. Yeah.
And somewhere like about a year to a year and a half, it can come earlier than that, we'd realize they've got all of the painful, hurtful, negative traits that of my
Mhm.
mom and dad. And they're
Mhm.
like, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
My kids have said to me, it's like, yeah, she had the worst of you, mom, and the worst of dad.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. And also, while you were talking about that, I had this thought that popped in, and we'll get into this piece of it, I'm sure, later, but it's interesting, or isn't it interesting, how you were talking about the relational template with the mother and how our society is so disconnected from the feminine. I mean, we have our certain things that we focus on for mother, like Mother's Day, and mothers have to be a certain way and all these different things. But it's interesting that our society is so disconnected from the feminine just in general. And to me, that's kind of like not only from this programming or the developmental trauma, it also kind of fits in with the sole purpose of the planet right now. Like I saw that as soon as you said it. Here we're coming full circle into reconnecting with the feminine. What would you say about that?
Well, I really have done a lot of going down this rabbit hole, and what I finally recognized is that it's not just that we're disconnected from the feminine, we are disconnected from the divine feminine.
Yes, yes.
And it's that sense of divinity. I mean, if we look at these kind of like archetypal pictures of Mary holding Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
what we see is this divine mother holding a divine child. And that's kind of an ideal, but lordy, lordy, I don't know how long it's been in our human history since women have understood themselves to be divine, were treated as divine, and their role as mother was considered to be divine. I know for sure it happened in Egypt
Mm-hmm.
because there's just lots and lots of different icons and Egyptian portrayals of Isis as the mother holding her son Horus. And well, maybe there was some of that after the birth of Jesus, so there's a piece of that. But somewhere, I don't know, maybe it was when we really became a patriarchal species. And because, I mean, early in our history, mothers were everything, and everything was recognized as coming from the feminine. But then the men were kind of like marginalized. So we had a period in history where the masculine function and I would say our left brain began to develop. And as we got into that era, it's like the masculine left brain stopped talking to the feminine right brain. We are kind of like divided brain beings, and
Mm-hmm.
you can go into cultures that still have that more right brain focus and they have more acceptance and recognition of the feminine. But in the West, no.
Yeah, yeah. And the women are actually the givers of life. I mean, that's the thing. If it wasn't for us both, and carrying the child, then life wouldn't exist. That's what the Native Americans, I think it was the Native Americans that spoke of us being the women being the givers of life.
Well, that's been our role,
Yeah,
ever since
the dawning of time.
well, ever since human beings were divided into male and female, that the role
Right.
of female was the life giver, and the role of the masculine, he was the protector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
The I learned from again Native American. It's like the masculine, the divine masculine is the physical protector with his strength of the divine feminine, who also protects the divine masculine with her spiritual and emotional strength. That's part
Right. Well, that was kind of when society or culture was balanced, but we're very out of balance right now.
right,
And
right.
so I think this is responsible for a lot of the problems that we
Yeah,
see right now, not just in America or in the West, but I think we're
the
seeing
whole
this
world.
this issue all over the planet.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, before I get into these questions, I want to ask you about some different things that you've kind of brought up with me. I'd like for you to explain because I've taken a class in trauma informed, and that's a buzzword. And if you could kind of give an explanation or a description of what that actually means, what is trauma informed mean?
Well, it's really the first part of it, at least in the way that I have worked with it, it's helping people understand that trauma is basically a reaction to something that gets stored in the nervous system.
Yes. Okay.
And once it's stored in the nervous system, it affects our health, it affects our behavior, it affects a lot of things. But what I also recognized was that most people who who were thinking about trauma thought, about it kind of like as PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And PTSD is really post-traumatic stress disorder is a term that describes event trauma.
Right.
So there really wasn't any term that described developmental trauma. And right now, they stopped the profession. We had a big conflict somewhere like around 2012, 13, and 14. And there was a collective understanding that if the term developmental trauma was used professionally and it was uh, declared a real diagnosis, that everything would be developmental trauma.
Mm.
So they came up with a new name for it. They call it now complex
I
PTSD.
was just about to ask you about that. Okay.
Yeah, so they put the C in front of it, which technically stands for complex, but if you read it through another lens, the C stands for childhood trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're talking
Well,
about.
it's interesting because some of the stuff that I've learned with complex PTSD is that it's kind of like a stacking of traumas throughout your lifetime. It's like every time a trauma happens, if you haven't had closure with that trauma or healed your nervous system or whatever, it just kind of stacks on top of each other. And then every time an emotion or something subconsciously or unconsciously reminds you of something that happened to you in childhood, that it kind of pokes on that and creates that reactive response. Is that?
It filters down through the layers. I always think
Yeah.
about trauma work as doing archaeology.
Yeah.
We start with the layers on top, and they
Right.
usually are related to things that we remember, and
Right.
they are like the most recent things. But as you peel off the layers of the onion, you get down to this unconscious stuff that is stored before we had verbal memory. I mean, basically, developmental trauma is what happens to us in the first birth, gestation, birth, and the first 3 years. And so when we develop linear memory and the left hemisphere starts kicking in, then we can take these memories from the right brain and we can talk about them over here. And that's what makes it a kind of a unified memory. But prior to that, all this stuff is stored in the body and stored in the right brain. And we don't have a name for it, but it comes up as pictures, it comes up as sensations, it comes up, as what I would call kind of primal stuff, it
Yeah.
comes up,
Yeah.
it's so early. So back to your question about trauma-informed care. So what I'm talking about now is the kind of thing that's in the trauma-informed care training that I helped co-create. It's still online, and it educates people about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better to get educated about trauma when you're not in a trauma state. So if
Yeah.
you put people in the classroom and you present it in a kind of a logical, linear manner, people can tolerate it. But I learned when I was doing live trainings that if there was a segment that was coming up that could be triggering for people, I would give them a warning and say, okay, now what I am going to say might trigger you. And it was interesting. I always watched the women when I got this childhood trauma in my presentations. I would see these women kind of drift off and they're not present. And then I realized they weren't focused on their own childhood trauma. They were thinking about, oh my God, what did I do to my kids?
Mm-hmm. That makes
So they were
sense.
starting to have these kind of like guilt reactions because for the first time somebody explained what childhood trauma is. Now, it didn't put them in touch with their own. I mean, that's another whole layer.
Right.
So this is what trauma-informed care does, because prior to trauma-informed care trainings, when people were doing strange, weird, odd, unusual things, everybody was like, oh man, they're just crazy. And they had all
Mm-hmm.
these names for people, that were really, hurtful because it was just a person who had a bad experience who is showing the impact of that bad experience. And once people understood that everybody's not crazy, I mean, this is not about crazy. This is about what people do when they have trauma they're not aware of. This is how they act. And so
Mm-hmm.
the whole goal of trauma-informed care is to create compassion. Now, I want to say one other thing about it that I think is really important, which is um, There was another factor that I saw that I always emphasized, and that is that there were some people who, once they understood childhood trauma, that they described themselves and began to perceive themselves as helpless victims.
Mm,
So they would go into this, like, they would create like victim stories that they could tell and repeat, which, they just basically re-traumatize themselves every time that they told it. But it really, it was a stance that some people use to prevent asking the question, okay, well, what can I do about this?
right. Yeah,
So
that makes
that's
sense.
really the ultimate goal of trauma-informed care training, is to say, well, if you've had it, okay,
Hmm.
this is how it works. And there are very effective tools for repairing it. So
Yeah,
with that paradigm, then trauma-informed care moved people out of just judging, and criticizing people who had strange behaviors, which really causes separation. So if I look
hmm,
at somebody and I have a judgment, I have like a oh reaction. But
right,
if I
right.
look at somebody, who's acting strange, and I'm thinking, I wonder what happened to them.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, because I mean, for years and years, I mean, it wasn't until much more recently that people started to recognize what trauma actually was. And I'm not sure how long ago this was, because it made me think about this when you were talking about it, is Oprah Winfrey, and I can never remember the guy's name. He's a psychiatrist. They wrote a book together. But the questions that they asked, and I don't remember the name of the book again, it's like, I think it's something, what happened to you, um, but it versus what's wrong with you. Because whenever somebody has a behavior or behaves a certain way, people all will always, or at least back in the day, and I'm sure they still do it now. What's wrong with you? Why are you acting like that? And that kind of thing. And it's not about what's wrong with them, because that trauma is still stuck in the nervous system and hasn't been the loop hasn't been closed, so to speak.
Right.
And so if you can go deeper into that before you throw that question out and say what happened to this person for them to behave like that, then you're actually opening up an opportunity for healing. Where when you immediately say what's wrong with you, then you're shutting everything down. The person, you, relationship, communication, everything gets shut off with that kind of thing.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like people have to think like therapists, because if people come in to see a therapist and they have a problem, and the therapist says, what's wrong with you?
Right.
These people are out the door. But
Right.
if a therapist says, well, tell me what happened to you. And,
Yeah.
and so there's this curiosity, but it's a question for joining and for connecting.
Yes,
So that
exactly.
what's wrong with these people? That is a message, that it's judging, and it absolutely causes people to close their hearts and push people away.
Right. And that's what or therapy has been for the longest time, until they started to recognize different things. Like I was in therapy the first time when I was 8 7 8 years old, and had been seeing therapists my whole life. And then as I was going through my own process, moved into somatic work. But for a while there, before I got into the somatic work, I had this like negative connotation based off of my experience with therapists. That, I went to one therapist, I remember, and she was getting ready to do EMDR with me, and I was therapizing myself because she wasn't doing anything. She was just sitting there with her clipboard asking me the questions, but she didn't like actually connect with me. It was this, and that's the way it was years ago. But then I had that thought, those thoughts in my head of my experience. And when I started learning and doing somatic work, then I was like, therapy's no good. Yeah, and cognitive therapy is just which is not true. I had to learn that the hard way, because now things move, things progress, people learn, they understand things a little bit better. And so now is a time where cognitive therapists have a better understanding, a broader understanding of that part of it, where they can actually help you to understand where this is coming from. Like you're talking about with the trauma informed work is very, it was very powerful for me. I took a course, a short course on it just to validate everything that I had experienced and learned throughout my healing journey. And I was like, well, I've been through all this trauma and I've had all these things going on and I know all about trauma informed work. I just want to get an idea if I'm on the right track. So I took a little short trauma informed course and then it was, oh, yeah, I am. I know what's going on here. I got it. Now it makes sense to me. So with all of that, is there something beyond healing our childhood trauma?
Well, that's a really good question because I have always treated psychotherapy as a spiritual practice.
Mm, okay.
Because when I did my own work and when I helped other people do deeper work, I felt like I was connecting with their soul.
Mm,
So there was this sense of like being a spiritual protector. It's like if people open up to that level, it becomes sacred work.
yes.
So I always held, everything that I did in my practice, I always held it as sacred work. And as I moved beyond my trauma, I wasn't attached to my story. I didn't see myself as a victim. I didn't describe myself as a victim, as I
Hmm.
saw myself as a victim who overcame a lot of adversity. And I've been a meditator for a very long time. So just doing that, what I will call foundational work, that we have in the first 3 to 5 years of our life. Once we've cleared the trauma out of that, we can evolve
Mm,
without all these things as a limitation. So I
mhm,
think this is the path that a lot of people start with, that they start, doing their healing work with this old trauma. But once they get beyond it, they see that the door opens to what I would call higher consciousness, and through meditation and all kinds of practices that help us become more spiritually connected, whether it's to higher forces or to the earth, the
mhm,
more, that we have a life that is not anchored in trauma. It's not our story, it's not our identity. We begin to see as ourselves as some really godlike beings who have amazing capabilities that we can develop,
mhm,
if
mhm,
that becomes a new focus. And for I think people on the spiritual path, that's how it is. They just don't live in the trauma world anymore.
mm. Yeah, and so this is very interesting because a lot of people, including me, when I first recognized this particular word, I think it's an elaborate, more elaborate than we think it is. It's the word stuck. Is there's so many people who are stuck, don't understand why they are stuck, which in my mind, it's because their trauma hasn't been cleared from their nervous system or the grief or the emotions, however you want to put it.
Can I address that?
Sure. I was just about to ask you
Okay.
another question, but go ahead.
Well, I spent a lot of my professional life training counselors.
Hmm.
I did it in the university. I did it in private programs that I taught myself. And the whole, I got a really long-term, deep look at the mental health profession
Hmm.
in this country. And frankly, it's crap.
Yeah.
So a lot of places, I mean, the program that I taught in for quite a while required that people do their own work. But I'm just going to tell the truth now.
Uh-oh.
I
Okay.
moved, I moved to North Carolina for a while. And as I was living there, I had another opportunity to provide um, training programs, particularly in childhood trauma, for professionals. And there were
Mm,
people who showed up at these trainings who said, I didn't come here to do my work. I came here basically to get recipes to put on my cards for how to help other people. And they were offended. There were people who were offended that to think they might have trauma of their own, or to think that they they should have to do their own work. I mean, I was stunned beyond belief. And finally, I just said, I'm not working at this place anymore. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to have to spend hours while I'm trying to help people explain why
Mhm, mhm.
your own work and then fighting with people who were trying to convince me that they shouldn't have to do that. So I do know that, training programs prepare people to do some of their own work, but I have spent, well, since, let me see, intensively since about 2016, I have been actively involved in um, training programs in Ukraine in Gestalt therapy.
Oh,
And I can tell you, the first year of their training program is nothing but doing your own work.
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And after you've spent a whole year doing your own work, then you start the training program. And every step of the way, there is some supervisor that is watching everything. These people are they they put they put their people in the 12-foot water of the swimming pool, and they learn how to do all kinds of things in the deep water
Thank you.
that would stun American professionals because
Yes, yes. And I've always said for years now, the best therapists and coaches are the ones who do their own work because how else are you going to be able to empathize and understand what somebody's going through if all you're coming from is book learning? It doesn't make any sense to me.
this is why we're talking about stuck. Because who is stuck are the therapists. And I can't tell you how many people that came to me and they were like, yeah, I was in therapy with this person and I did that, but I didn't make any progress. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Mm.
I think I'm so broken, that I
I don't know
can't.
what's wrong with me because I couldn't get any. Yes, I
That's
know.
right.
I've had that.
And when I said, maybe your
Yeah.
therapist is stuck, and they're like,
Yeah. 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 Now, I want to make sure everybody understands, let's be clear, that there are very, very, very good therapists out there. My experience and what Janae is talking about are things that a lot of people experience, and it's not everybody. So that's one thing we don't generalize anything, but I've
It varies kind of with culture because what I understood when I lived in North Carolina is that it's the South
yeah.
and people there are much more polite. I mean, they don't say bad things about
We
people, but
talk about that. Yeah.
they always end it with bless her heart.
Yeah. Bless y'all, pea picking hot.
So it's partly, it's the training programs, yes, but I also have to allow that there are cultural differences where
Yeah.
it's kind of not so acceptable to just dive in, and start looking at, the deep waters right away. They're more careful about it. So, but because I was involved in institutions and I was part of the American Counseling Association for quite a while, and I remember talking to the high up people. This would have been like 2015, 2016,
Mm-hmm.
and asking them, why do you not have what is the curriculum for American Counseling Associated training programs not include a course on basic trauma? And they're like, well, we have this one course. It's about, crisis intervention and catastrophes. That was all of it. So I still have to say that the institution, the American institution, now it could change since then, but for quite a long while, it was not part of their vision of what counselors needed or should be trained in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I believe it has changed because I have a few friends that are therapists, and I've had these conversations with them too because I've been so dug in my whole life with this information. I love this kind of stuff. So I don't know, call me crazy, but that's okay. That's all right. So now you started, go ahead. You want to finish?
I'm just saying, I'm old enough to have seen the history of it.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. It's like, and then I had the word Freud pop into my head when you were talking. I'm like, I mean, think about the way things were. I took psychology 101 when I was in college, my first year, because I loved it. And I learned all about the original, the what do they call the fathers of psychology and all
Yeah, all the
stuff.
historical stuff.
What was that?
All the historical stuff.
All the historical stuff back then. Yes, it's historical, but that's what they believed. This was in 1983. So it's huge differences now, and people are starting to understand. And then I started doing research later on when I got my coaching, my spiritual coaching certificates and the trauma informed stuff that I've done. And it's like these guys were also traumatized. And Freud, from my understanding, did not talk about it. Like his buddy who stopped being buddies with him. So, like, even at a point where Carl Jung had to separate himself from Freud because he could start going into the archetypes and the different things that actually happened. But he was traumatized too. I read some stuff about him. He was traumatized. So
Well, I would like to know. I would like to know a person who's not traumatized because, frankly, we all have karma, and that's why we're here on this planet. So
I think so.
if you got karma, I'm pretty sure by the time
Yeah,
you're 3 years old that it has all been parked in there so that you are going to have to look at
right,
it.
right.
But also Jung was a very spiritual person.
Yes, yeah. And I brought him up intentionally because I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the most common obstacle to overcome in our spiritual development? Because he was huge into spirituality. He talked about the subconscious, and he even threw himself into his work so much that he was tracking himself while he was doing it. He had like his black journals, and then later created the red book, which is like this thick. And I don't know how many people have actually read that thing, but it's like a deep dive into his own life. So can you what? So the question being the
What's
most
the
common
obstacle? And
obstacles.
that's a
Yeah.
very good question, but I would not go to Carl Jung to answer.
No. Okay.
No,
You know
I
more.
would go to all of the people who are involved in, like Bowlby, who
Colby.
are immersed in
Oh.
attachment theory, because this is something I have studied intensively, both for myself and also, in the books that I have written. But there is in the between the first year and the third year. Well, actually, this doesn't go back to Carl Jung. I'm sorry, because he's the person who identified the process of individuation.
Right. Yes.
And between the time a child's about a year and a half and the time they turn 3, they go through 4 very distinct stages where they are separating psychologically from their mother.
Mm-hmm. Or supposed to
And
be. Supposed to be.
all these steps have been charted, but there is a point where the child is separated enough that they have their ego, and this ego wants to be in charge of everything.
No.
Now, if there is trauma in the mother-child relationship, this process gets more complicated. But
Mm-hmm.
ideally, the mother is both firm enough and soft enough that this little developing ego gets sandpapered down very gently
Mm-hmm.
to human size, because if it's not, the person becomes narcissistic and they become entitled and grandiose and all these things that are associated with narcissism.
Yep.
So there is a very important step that is supposed to happen. I don't think it happens very often in its most complete way that it was designed. So the mother's job is to let the child become separated, and at the same time the child needs to know mother is in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some kids who, by the age of 3 are already in charge of the mother. And what happens is, if this mother doesn't say, I'm the mother who's in charge and I know what's best for you. And yes, I know you don't like limits, and I know you have feelings whenever you get consequences for violating the rules and regulations that are designed to help you become a civilized person. I'm really sorry, but these are things that we have to go through in order to be a grown-up person who is a responsible citizen. Most mothers are either they're better at nurturing or they're
Mhm.
better at setting limits, but most mothers are not good at
The
both.
middle. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if the child doesn't experience, this is a complex thought. If the child doesn't experience that the mother is in charge, not that she's dominating, but she's in charge. She's the one who sees where the safe zones are. She enforces safe behavior. And when a child, needs to remember what the rules are for safe behavior, she provides a consequence. It's not punishment.
Hmm.
And this is kind of like a behavioristic program to help the child learn how to contain their energy and to focus it so that they're not in conflict with people, that they're using their basic energy as a creative force.
Hmm.
Now, if people haven't had that experience, this is where the obstacle is. Sometimes these kids become oppositional and defiant. No matter what the mother says, it's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to cooperate. And so it leads to these kind of lifelong battles about who's in charge.
Hmm.
So, why this is important and why I see it as an obstacle is that I'm speaking now from my own personal, but also professional experience, that there is a stage in our spiritual development where we have to surrender our ego and our will to our higher self. There's different
Hmm.
names for this higher self, but the way that we were designed is this higher self knows more than we could ever know in our simple kind of fragmented humanness. And for a person to go through, if you go to the second step in 12-step groups, this is the one that busts people, because you have to admit that there is a higher power who has more wisdom, more knowledge than we do, and that I will surrender my ego and my defiant oppositional behavior to this higher power. So that is the obstacle. And because people didn't have it in their childhood, it becomes an obstacle. Now, what I learned in my practice is that if I had clients who had been through a 12-step program and they had done this second step
Hmm.
where they surrendered their ego and their need to dominate and control, they were the ones that were the fast travelers in psychotherapy.
Interesting. Okay.
But the ones who hadn't had that experience, who didn't come in through 12 groups, often they would get in power struggles with me
Yeah.
where I was their mother. And there was this effort
Hmm.
dominate and control our relationship. And I remember the first person I had who was like doing this, and it was such a problematic client. I went to my supervisor and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this person. And my supervisor said, Janae, this person is borderline.
So then we go down a whole nother rabbit hole with that.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so if we haven't been through this surrender process
Hmm.
where our need to control and dominate hasn't been tempered,
Hmm.
that when we get to this stage in our spiritual growth, we we never give up our ego, and we will always put our own interests first. It's kind of like narcissistic society. So
Yeah.
this is the
So
obstacle. It's a
there's
developmental
that.
obstacle that shows up 100% in our
Yeah.
spiritual development.
Yep, there's that for sure. Now I'm curious about something, Janae. How are biology and health related issues related to our psychological and spiritual growth? Because I know the mind body connection is we're not just talking about the mind here. What does that look like?
Well, this was a really important part of the trauma-informed care training because there was huge research that was done out in California. And what they found is that all this early childhood trauma creates a lot of different kinds of mostly autoimmune disorders by the
Yeah.
time that people are in their 50s. So this is not, this was a huge study, and the fact that it was so well done and it was so big, it's like, if there's anybody that doesn't believe there's a mind-body connection, just go read this research.
Interesting. Yeah. And I know that there's a connection. I never really when you said that, I thought about the autoimmune uh, uh, working with the nervous system, because when the nervous system shot, that affects the autoimmune system. Correct? Is that what that is?
Right, this research is called the ACEs research, and it's an
Oh,
acronym. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences apostrophe S. And all you have to do is type ACEs research into any search engine, and there'll be more information than you ever wanted to know about the mind-body connection and how it relates to childhood trauma.
yeah, and just as a real quick add-on, like when I was a massage therapist years and years and years ago, I started to recognize that myself just in my clients based off of emotions that they were having when they came to get a massage. And we tend to hold like stress in our shoulders, we hold fear in our gut. I mean, our body contains our emotions, and if we don't release them,
I can also say that very early childhood trauma, like during the first year, is held in the upper lobes of the lungs, and that's
mm,
why I had pneumonia.
interesting. Okay. Because that makes sense to me now too. I used to have a hard time breathing. And I first experienced it when I was, I think, about 6 or 8 at camp. And I never knew what that was. And it lasted most of my life until I started doing the work. And then I don't have that issue anymore. Well, I mean, if I stopped up or something, that's one thing. But yeah, it was just like the deep breath. I could never get a deep breath. So there's something there. So thank you so much, Janae. That's been very helpful, especially for me, because I'm just like this. I always get excited about this kind of stuff. So before we wrap up, I'd love to finish with 5 questions that I ask all my guests so our listeners can hear a little bit more about your personal wisdom and insight. So, how do you see individual healing work contributing to larger societal transformation? This might open a can of worms, but go ahead.
Well, I'll try to be succinct, and that is there's two things. One is that we really only have power over ourselves. So the fact that we take on responsibility for ourselves has a huge impact on our evolution. And we know that everything is connected. So if we're doing our work, it will change the collective energy. And the more people that do their individual work, the more that the collective energy uh, is, I would just say, upgraded.
So, real quick, could you give an explanation as to why that works? Because most people don't realize that we're one, we are connected. A lot of people don't understand that thought process. So, can you kind of elaborate on it just a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a thought process. It's a scientific
It's
fact because if
okay.
you, this is the basic premise of quantum science that says
Oh,
we're in a world of energy, and whatever energy we have affects other people, but also other people's energy affects us.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. That's why we're here. Hey,
I was just expanding.
expanding. Well, correcting and expanding. So that's all right because now I understand. How do you define awakening?
For me, it's a spiritual process, but it's also, it starts in our psychological thing because I think when we're born, as very small infants, we're not very awake and we're not very aware. And as we go through,
Hmm.
Jung's individuation process and we become aware of having a separate sense of self, that is an awakening. What to do with that self once it gets awakened, I think it's another journey, but it's really about, I think, being able to observe ourselves, to
Mhm.
say, oh gosh, why did I say that? You know,
Yeah.
and then once we can observe ourselves, then we make this effort to be self-corrective. So I think it's a combination of these two things, self-awareness and then the ability to say, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
I'm not going to keep taking care of my sister. I don't care how
That's
sick
right.
she
That's right.
is,
When we know better, we do better.
That's the self-correction piece.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. What do you believe soul divinity is?
Well, I believe our souls came from the divine. I think we were all created out of divine material, which is why people say, oh, we're made from stars. Well, I think the stars are made out of plasma and that we have bodies that came from that plasma. So we're all from the same source.
Hmm.
Everything is created in the divine. There is no other creator besides God. God created everything, whatever we want to call God. There's some intelligent being
Yeah.
that knew what he, her, she was doing and created us.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you. How can people get in touch with you?
I have a website and it's really easy. It's JanaeWeinhold.com.
Okay. That was easy. That was definitely
Yeah, so
easy.
I have quite a bit of information about my background and my writing and some of the books I've written. So if you just go to JanaeWeinhold.com, it's all right there.
Yeah. And I have to say, Janae's been doing this for I don't know how many years now.
About 40 years.
About 40 years. So she's kind of come through all the different, variations and of societal, the Western world societal way of looking at things and her own experiences and all these things. So there's a lot of information in there. And it's really cool because it for me, especially with that book she wrote, Levolution, it was eye opening.
It's available on Amazon.
It's
Just go to
available on Amazon, and maybe we'll put a link. We'll put a link for the book on the description along with your website. But just to understand what that was, and when I found out what the attachment trauma was for me, that expanded everything based off of what I had already learned from hers, even more. It was huge. So, yeah,
One more thing I want to
yes,
add. So,
go ahead.
if people go to Amazon, there's also another really important book on there that I wrote, and it's How to Break Free of the Drama Triangle and Victim Consciousness, because there is no evolution when people retain their identity as the victim. And in our culture, we are programmed to be victims, not to be
Yes.
accountable, not to be responsible. So this book is, I think, 80 some pages. It's a short, sweet, and to the point about what it is, how it gets created, but mostly how to get out of it. And if people can get out of victim consciousness, they for sure will evolve.
Yeah, I know how deep in victim consciousness I was, so I hear that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, I want to say that I think that this podcast that you are doing is really important. And it gives me faith and inspiration about the future. So I want to thank you for offering it as a service. And I know that your heart is really in it. And that if everybody was as invested in their growth as you are, that the world would be a different place.
Oh, thank you, Janae. I really appreciate it. After doing over 35 years worth of work, that's like, whew, thank you for saying that because that's huge.
You are not invisible.
Oh, that too. Apparently not. Oh, yeah. I gotta say this. So I I and others fight our whole lives to be seen. And then when it's time to be seen, it's like, no, I don't want anybody to see me. So yeah,
I see you.
thank you. Okay, thank you for that. So Janae, thank you so much for sharing your story and the deep wisdom it carries. And your journey is such a powerful reminder that even the experiences we can't consciously recall can shape our lives in ways that we've never imagined, but they can also be healed. So, for those of you listening, if Jane's story touched something in you, please share this episode with someone who may need it. Subscribe so you don't miss future conversations and connect with our community where we keep exploring the truth of who we are. Remember, your body holds the story, but you hold the power to rewrite it. Did you want to say something real quick before I sign off?
Amen.
Amen. Okay. Amen to that. Thank you all for being here with us on Awakening Soul Divinity.